we say good Monday morning to the entire Trialan, Grenada, Carriacou, and P.T. Martini. Good morning to everyone, wherever you're listening and viewing us from. Especially those of you via GBN TV, whatever part of the island you're viewing. I will say very well and fantastic good morning to you, wherever you're at. Once again, especially those of you via our social media platform, Facebook. Good morning. Don't forget to share the live. Our YouTube channel also share the, of course, I don't think you can share YouTube. No. So I shouldn't say share YouTube. But YouTube channel, let me say good morning to those of you viewing via YouTube channel. And welcome to another edition of To The Point. This morning, once again, I have with me Mr. Sylvan McIntyre. Sylvan, good morning. How you doing? I hope you don't mind me calling you on a first name basis.
No, man, I am really fine, Glenn. Good morning. I hope you don't mind me calling you Glenn rather than just saying GT.
Yeah, no,
that's okay. GT sound like a brand.
Yeah. Well, my name is actually Glenn
Telesford.
So we just, short, I say GT.
Yeah, and GT, GT at GTV because I'm something really good.
Yeah, some people think I'm from Guyana to say Georgetown. Yeah.
So good morning to viewers, listeners, followers everywhere. My pleasure to be in studio again this morning.
All right. Last week we started off, of course, in a series of programs we'll be having, especially on a Monday. Folks, you could tune in and get loads of information from Mr. McIntyre pertaining to, disaster risk management reduction and emergency response, all these things are pertaining to when there's maybe, as he said, and hazard is in place and maybe the disaster comes after. Just in case any of these things happen, we're going to, of course, during these series of programs, every Monday, once the Almighty permits, we're going to be here and we're going to be talking about these things. We also will give you folks, the listeners of yours, already the opportunity also to calling from time to time. You may have a question or two you may like to ask, and I know it would not be an issue at all. So McIntyre will certainly chime in on your, of course, whatever question you may ask. Certainly we'll be happy to answer it. So we're going to kick off this morning. Last week, Mr. McIntyre, of course, we dealt enough. We focused a lot, per se, in our first show last week on information.
We did.
And I had some pretty good response from it in terms of individual calling. They said they have suddenly learned a lot. So they're looking forward to tuning in today again.
Yes.
And certainly absorb more in terms of conversation like this pertaining to disaster management and risk reduction and everything else. Today, we want to focus on a couple of topics. And as the morning progresses, we're going to, of course, dive into them. Maybe after every break segment we come in. And we're probably going to give the folks out the opportunity to call in this morning and ask a question or two pertaining to, anything, any of the topics that we're speaking about, they could probably chime in on it. This morning we want to talk a lot about common injuries and emergencies per se, especially when there's a hazard or a disaster per se. And hazard and disasters are something that you explain could be vary. It doesn't necessarily have to be a hurricane or a storm or anything, but they vary in terms of what could happen, which could cause lots of folks to get injured.
Some kind of emergency.
Some kind of emergency to take place. So let's kick off with common injuries and an emergency in this first segment as we go through this morning.
Oh, yeah. So once again, it's my pleasure. And I think the initiation of this program and the overall intent is to ensure that we empower community persons and persons who may be at home, maybe retired persons, maybe persons who might be on vacation and so on. This information, I'm sure they will be tuned in to understand more. And knowledge and education is empowering people, and it is building a resource that you cannot really get rid of once you have knowledge. And so we will speak this morning on a few common injuries and things that may happen in the home, on the job, and how people respond to it. I want to set the context that, the response, the appropriate and timely response to any kind of an emergency can determine how the outcome of that will be. And from my own personal experience, I have seen quite a number of responses. People don't know what to do, and those who have the keen interest and desire to do something, they are not doing it appropriately. Our health facilities, our health practitioners, they are sometimes overwhelmed with responsibilities at their facilities. And it is critically important that we work with them. They understand what community persons can do, what people in the home could do, and how they can minimize the effect of injuries that they cannot prevent. So the hospital workers, the nurses, the doctors, they are considered to be second aiders. And so anybody could render first aid. And then there's a group of other person that we would call first aiders. And then you have the paramedics and the EMTs, etc. We're not going to be delving deeply into that. But I want to focus on some of the little injuries and emergencies that can happen at home. So for instance, someone gets a cut with a sharp instrument, which is an incision, or somebody gets a laceration, one of these jagged open wounds that would bleed profusely or otherwise. How do you deal with that? Someone just falling, they may have fainted. People having injuries like chronic, otherwise thing that would come on them. For instance, you may have emergencies like asthma attack, epilepsy, someone getting a mild stroke or otherwise, or even a mild heart attack. There are quite a number of things that you can do. For instance, you're at home and you get a burn. What do you do? Or somebody get a burn. And we would expand that to other emergencies, for instance, a vehicular accident. And we know people responding to that. How do I treat a victim? What should I do? Should I just pull out my phone and take pictures for when the people come? Or should I post it on social media? Or do I have a responsibility to ensure that kind of immediate care is given to an individual in that kind of a emergency? How do I treat that? And I've heard of situations where you have near drowning. Unfortunately, there was one time when there were two young men who lost their lives at the Concord waterfall. And I am reasonably assured that at least if there was someone who knew more about Fossey, that at least one of them could have been saved. And we've seen a number of situations where people fall. And once someone has fallen, you would want to suspect that they are likely to have spinal injury. And there's a particular way of handling these persons. I would really want to be able to touch on that, because I know as a community, as Grenadians, we are willing to help. We like to help. We would go outside there with good intention, but we may make a situation worse just by the way we deal with it. There was one time a young man I heard fell off a mango tree in Marion. They scooped him up, 8-year-old, went to the hospital, dead person. Someone fell off a truck, another one gave me the story, just around Keep Left by Lacqua's place there. They scooped him up, threw him on the truck between Lacqua and the hospital. He died. A young man fell from a coconut tree, and what they said, all he could have done was move his head. He moved his head and he died. So why are all these things happening? Somebody get a puncture or a stab wound, or they may get a large incision or otherwise, and they bleed to death. A young lady fell against a cabinet, broke the glass. She had an incision or a puncture thereof and bled to death. Nobody do something about it. So these are some of the things that we want to be able to delve into. And finally, before I actually zero in on any specific, I want to just let people know up front that when there is an emergency where there's a bleeding situation, loss of blood will lead to death. It will first lead to a state of shock and somebody will die. And crown this, someone doesn't need all of the blood in their body to be alive. You need all of your blood to function properly, for all the organs to function. But you do only need sufficient blood in your system to stay alive. And if people or community members are really cognizant of that kind of a fact, a lot more will be done to stabilize someone, to what you call control the bleeding, and we can have more persons saved, we can have less loss of limbs, etc. And our emergency response and the way that the second aiders at the hospital will treat people, we will have a lot more recoveries taking place. So that I thought that this angle will really help, and I am getting the feel that we'll have an audience outside it that are beginning to be really keen to hear, well, if this thing happens, how can I deal with it? And the larger one, which I name it the human life saving machine. You don't have no instruments, you don't have to get no technology or anything. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR. I call it the human life saving machine, where you can just do some chest compression in the middle of the chest, or you can do rescue breath along with it, and someone's life could be saved. And you don't have to have any instrument to do that one. And I think every household, every family at least, should be able to do CPR. So that's one of the things we're going to touch on, and I'm expecting a lot of questions and a lot of interest and a lot of feedback, because our last program we've been getting some feedback, and some people are we're beginning to have a followership. I can tell you that. Right. And once we build on this program, I can tell you, I think we will be doing Grenada a lot of good. And that's my contribution back to our communities.
Oh, certainly great hearing that. But my first in the series of questions I would like to ask, yes. We also will welcome the phone calls from, of course, the listener and viewing audience out there. In terms of someone receiving those injuries, per se, as you mentioned in your initial stages of speaking, let's say someone get that little laceration, that little cut, per se, in the household.
Yes.
What are the first steps as someone who's around them should be taking in terms of to help that individual?
Absolutely. And exactly where we were going to go, because circulatory disorders or problems where people are losing blood. And bleeding actually is once blood exits from the normal process of circulation, that is considered bleeding. And the body itself has a certain amount of blood which is required, let's say 6 liters, like 1.5 to 2 gallons of blood that the body would have. Once a considerable amount of blood is lost, the person would go into a state of shock, and we will speak about that later on as to exactly what is shock. But once somebody gets an incision, let's say that's a wound with a sharp instrument, a knife, scissor, etc., a sharp cutlass and all of that. That is called an incision. A laceration, in its sense, has to be like somebody get a ripped open skin, like for instance, ripped against barbed wire or something like that sort. It's a jagged, it's not really smooth. So that one is a laceration. But whether it's a laceration or an incision or a puncture, people will lose blood. And I like to put it this way, that if you have a bucket with water and you puncture it, you put a nail hole in it, a small hole, water will seep out, right?
So true.
And eventually that bucket will empty. If you take a cutlass or a larger something and you puncture that bucket, the water will come out much quicker.
Even faster than a small wound.
But it will eventually empty. So that is important. So what you do then to minimize that, it is critical to whether you preserve that person's life or you prevent that injury from becoming worse, or you promote some level of recovery. So once someone gets the tissues punctured, and with that I'm saying here, you can have internal and external wound, because someone can have an accident and they can bleed on the inside as well. So if you have a situation where the skin or the outer layer of tissues there, or the cells are broken, what you want to do first and foremost, your aim is to control the bleeding. As I mentioned before, once somebody is bleeding, they will go into a state of shock, and shock is the last stage one will go before they die, actually. And so your aim is to minimize the loss of blood. That is exactly what happened. And how do you do that? A lot of people spend a lot of time trying to flush it out, trying to wash it, trying to do everything else before even applying pressure.
So that's the last thing you should actually do.
Not the last thing, but the first thing you want to do, your aim is to control the bleeding, to minimize blood loss, whether it's a large wound or a small one. So how do we do that? If it's a small wound, you want to apply direct pressure. And stick a pin here. You can have indirect pressure by doing pressure points where your arteries, you can definitely apply some pressure indirect, and it can slow the flow of blood, or you can stop. But we're saying direct pressure, meaning that one can use the palm heel of the hands or the fingers and press on that area, hold on to it. And the body has its response mechanism just as well. Now, if somebody gets a wound and you are able to apply pressure immediately, get the skin back, you realize within seconds that the clotting process of the blood starts. You realize the skin itself is attaching itself to the rest of the body. So that initial response is really critical. When you have a slower response, you have more cell loss, more tissue loss, and so the healing process will take longer. This is why once somebody gets a cut, if it gets to the point where they have to get sutures or they have to, what people call stitches, the doctors or the nurse will tell you, you have to get to the accident and emergency, the A&E, as quickly as possible. If you delay that process by too long, for hours or days, they cannot actually do that process because it would be an effort in futility. So once someone gets an initial wound, even if you apply the pressure, and if it's a small one at home, you can apply just an elastoplast, one of those over it, or there's something called a butterfly stitches that you can do with maybe one of those tape. You can just put those over it. But the first thing one really needs to do is to apply pressure. If one suspect that it may be contaminated, for instance, there's where you get punctured with a nail or something rusty, and then the issue of whether somebody had tetanus injection, all that comes in. So you want to minimize infection. So if you have liquid or so, you want to flush that out before you're putting any dressing. So you apply pressure, you can wash the area out, and then you apply a dressing. Now, a dressing doesn't have to be something that comes from the pharmacy. First aid basically is using readily available material, and you have it in the home. So you get a piece of rag, clean rag. A dressing is anything that you use to cover a wound. It has to be sterile or as clean as possible. My way of putting it is that even if you have to use something to cover a wound, it has to be sterile or clean. Even if it is dirty, it must be the cleanest thing that you can find.
Cleanest dirty thing, yeah.
You understand? The point is, I'm saying here that if you leave the wound exposed or open, you leave it open to infection, and you leave it open where the person can continue to bleed, and bleeding will lead to another stage. So you want to be able to control that as quickly as possible. And then what you can do in addition to that, you put a bandage over it. And a bandage is anything that is used to keep the dressing in place. So somebody gets a little cut, people just get a piece of cloth and they wrap around it. That will work too. But you want to ensure that that pressure is applied. So what you need to do, you can tear one of those sheets, tear one of those T-shirts and so, put small pieces over it, ensure that the blood is not seeping through that, and then you begin to wrap another covering over that. If the initial one that you put on, or the first one, it gets soaked through with blood, you can wrap another one on top of it. If both of them for some reason get soaked through as well, remove them both and start the process all over again. Maybe the pressure was not applied properly, so bleeding was not controlled to the extent. So that's simply as is. And one of the things that you want to do, ensure that it is not placed too tight. So ask the person, how are you feeling? Is there a tinkling or a joking or a needle-like sensation in your finger? Is your hand feeling numb or cold? Or the end of your finger, is it getting white? And so forth. And you do what is called check for circulation beyond the point where the dressing has occurred. Once you do that, you can guarantee that that wound that the person got would not be as serious once they get to the hospital or otherwise. And in some cases, you may not necessarily have to go to the hospital.
So you're practically saying your initial response is always the most important.
Most important. And the doctors and nurses know that. And this is why they empower us, and they work along with us to ensure that we know at communities what people should do, because we make their job easier. A lot easier. I remember there was one time we had a group of young people who went out in the field, and there was someone who got a fracture, and the team was able to stabilize the fracture. They were able to put a splint, they packaged and wrapped the person properly, had them on a backboard, brought to the hospital and everything. And when the doctor saw that, he said, wow. He said, I can trust myself with anybody who was part of that team. Meaning that when they got to the hospital, what was done, they realized that that initial intervention was appropriate. It was timely, it was okay, so their job just continued from there. And this is the kind of a response that we are expecting communities to be able to do. And I think more and more programs like these, and more that other people can do, we would like to empower our community members to be able to be relevant, appropriately trained responders.
How important it is for the know-how to do these practices?
It is critically important. You cannot pay enough, or you cannot pay for life. When one loses a limb, there's an accident where somebody's hand get trapped or otherwise, and that person will lose feeling because the nerves may be trapped in that accident. There might be bleeding that is taking place there, and loss of blood might be internal or otherwise. The more blood loss, the less use of that limb that the person is likely to have. So it is critical that people understand these simple steps. And the reason why I'm using a program like this is because I can explain in simpler or simplest forms how people can really conduct this procedure. Because I understand you only have, if there is a serious injury, there are two stages of death. You have the clinical stage of death and the biological state of death. The biological state of death is where the person goes off completely. And the clinical state of death, you have a 3 to 6 minutes between which, in some cases 4 minutes, within which the organs would totally shut off, or they go off.
So you're saying time factor is crucial?
It is very, very crucial. Yeah, because persons may go into that state of clinical death where you're not getting a pulse, the breathing is absent. Obviously, if you're not getting a pulse, maybe the heart is not functioning properly or not beating at all. But that person, then there is an opportunity for that person to be resuscitated. And that's why we want to be able to pung it home very strongly that the initial response is critical to any emergency. What you do first is really, really important, because there wouldn't always be a doctor, there wouldn't always be a trained first aider, there wouldn't always be a nurse there. But if you understand the simple things you can do, now responding or reacting to a situation, you don't have to be medically trained, because first aid is really using readily available material in an emergency. somebody has suddenly fallen ill, whatever there is that is available, you want to be able to adapt that to suit the injury that the person may have had. Now, we have gone into a lot of things and we were only speaking about
just basic
a cut. Somebody getting just an injury.
But the procedure technically is the same in all circumstances?
Not necessarily the same. As I indicated before, there are situations where the procedure will be different, where it have to be more rushed because, for instance, if somebody gets an artery that is punctured, it is severed, you'll have to be walking much quicker because the person will lose more blood quicker. The story is told of the gentleman, unfortunately, the Jamaican who got stabbed by the Park Bridge a couple of years ago. And an eyewitness told me that the blood was spurting. In other words, the blood was coming out in different beats and so on. And once I heard that, I said an artery was definitely severed, because once someone severs an artery, or it's broken, the blood would pump with the beat of the heart. It would just keep spouting. That blood will be bright red, so that person will die very quick. It doesn't mean that person have to die. If you have an early intervention where you can reduce the loss of that blood, you can minimize it. All the person needs is sufficient blood within the system to keep the organ alive for the time being, because the blood carries the nutrients and the oxygen just as well. So if you are able to keep the nutrients and the oxygen by way of saving enough blood within the system, once the person gets to the A&E, there's a very good chance that person's life could be saved. So that then takes a different type of procedure. Right. And then the other injuries, the other wound and so, we are going to speak about them and so how you would also handle them.
All right. So we're going to take a break inside the segment, Sylvan. We'll be coming back in a short, folks. Don't forget, you have to have the opportunity to call in. You have a question or two you may like to ask pertaining to the topic that we're speaking on this morning. You're certainly free to do so. Let's take a break. We're coming right back here on To The Point.
I want to be... I'm a winner. You are winner. Be an instant winner today with the NLA by simply purchasing your Daily Pick 3 and Playway tickets at your nearest agent or NLA outlet. As a proud sponsor of the CPL cricket coverage, the NLA continues to support the development of sports, culture, and nation building in Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. The NLA, making your dreams a reality. I'm a winner. You are winner. We are winners, winners.
Back, folks. It's To The Point for today, Monday. We have Sylvan with us this morning, and you know, of course, he's here in his personal capacity and in terms of disaster risk reduction and emergency response expert. He's here. We're talking various aspects in terms of when there's. We're talking today. Let's more focus when we talk. We're talking about common injuries, and during the first segment, we spoke a lot pertaining to common injuries that may occur in the home or even outside of the home, and the ways in which you can respond to that can help save an individual life. And I see we have a first caller. I don't know if you want us to entertain that call first before we move into another segment.
It would be good to do that. Yes, absolutely.
All right. Caller, good morning. How are you? Good morning, caller.
Yeah, good morning. Clearly?
Yes, we hear you. Go right ahead.
Okay, good morning. Good morning, Titi, and good morning, Sylvan. I'm glad that the program will be continuing on. And because for me, I've been calling for these kind of things for the longest while, and Sylvan would know that. Anything is better than nothing, and a lot of times we don't do anything. So this is very important, but I would like to make a few points. One is that we stress the preventative part of things more than anything else. We also stress the governance part of it. That's why I mentioned the Sendai framework, and also the whole governance arrangement and management, disaster management in Grenada. For instance, the law under which NADMA is operational, or even our connection with DEMA and so on, so that people don't understand. What I noticed over time is that our people don't understand process. And I know even when Sylvan was there, they was asking people to make sure they get them information from the right source and that kind of thing. It's this kind of, I would even appreciate even more if we really drill down to those things. I'm not discounting what he's doing. That is good, but I think we need to, from the beginning, establish where people understand when we do something, we do it with a framework in mind. Sylvan talked earlier on about people in the health sector being overwhelmed. I could testify to that because I'm a beneficiary of a 10-week course which a nurse in the hospital alerted me to. And unfortunately, she herself couldn't do that course because she was very overwhelmed. It was for first responders in terms of the impending or continuing severe climate change with Columbia University. So I think we need to help our system. In fact, finally, because I know I can't go on forever, it shows that we need to make our education system more responsive and adaptive. Because, I mean, the average person to understand what are the basic requirements or things they should do in a case of, emergency or accident or so, and do not panic, as I've seen many times people panic and cause more problems. Anyway, thank you very much, and I hope that my comments will be taken in good stead. Thanks.
Thank you for your contribution this morning, caller. Sylvan, so we're moving on this morning, and thank that caller there for, of course, his contribution this morning. We want to dive a bit more into the conversation this morning, into emergencies.
Yes.
I guess emergencies, if I'm right, you maybe correct me. Emergency goes in stages, per se. Would you agree with me with that?
It does.
Let's go into this emergency this morning.
And thank you. And I also want to commend the caller for the call, because the management system and structure would lead into how we deal with emergencies just as well. Mm-hmm. So he was on with us because that's actually where we were going. We were going to be speaking about emergency scenes management and how that process should undergo. First and foremost, has to be a national structure as to how emergencies should be managed and coordinated. But at community levels, how do you get communities to understand that there is a structure, there is a system for all of that? Something happened in a home, there is no manager and there is no first responder in the home who is trained or otherwise. At community level, people just get up and do what they think they need to do. And as I said before on the program earlier on, that people in their goodwill may just do the wrong thing because they're not trained to do it. So the conversation on management and dealing with emergency, it's a wider conversation. It's a wider setup that people need to be aware of. It starts from the strategic and it goes right down to the operational people. It means, therefore, that even at our government and policy level, that they too must have a mechanism in place and understand it. It is not unusual for senior people, especially within government structures, to distance themselves from things that they consider not to be their direct responsibility. And we're hoping that is not a situation that will continue. I think people at the policy level have to see themselves as an integral part of the system. They must understand what they put into a policy document, what they enshrine into legislation, and so they can understand that the people who are entrusted with the responsibility to implement it, that they know what they're doing. So it would not be a good thing for policy makers to distance themselves from emergency management. It is a critical area, and I would hope at whatever level that our state managers are at, that they would understand that the aspect of emergencies, if not well managed, can create a disaster, and disaster can have economic and financial and security implications. So it is critical from that end that they understand their own mechanism that exists, because oftentimes when you do not understand mechanisms, there is a whole aspect of panic. Panic will come in because you are not quite aware, and I saw that happening after Hurricane Ivan, that I think the process of complacency came through after 1955, where we felt that we had our hit.
Yeah, we safe.
And we saved that Grenada is out of the hurricane belt and nothing will happen to us. And so I think there was a national laissez-faire attitude towards emergency and disaster risk reduction. And so when we were struck by Hurricane Ivan, no disrespect, no disregard to the system and the mechanism there, it was just a period of complacency that not Grenada alone experienced, but the region. And so we had a reactive kind of an attitude, and as the caller was saying, the whole aspect of preventative is one of the things that we needed to champion a bit more. So it means, therefore, what I saw happening in Hurricane Ivan, there were ministers of government, there were permanent secretaries, there were public servants, there were national security apparatus. Everyone meant well, but they were not well informed, well au fait with a system of managing something of that magnitude. And not that the magnitude is something that we think that, yes, it was of the magnitude that was technically difficult for any person to manage, that overwhelmed us. But if we were used to getting ourselves accustomed to preparing and training and having mechanism, the response and the reaction to it could have been different. I want to say on a pleasant note, though, that it was only 10 months after that Grenada rose up and proved that we had the capacity to respond to another hurricane, which was Hurricane Emily, that came 9 months after Hurricane Ivan. So that process taught us a lesson.
And we did manage it a whole lot better.
And that was definitely better. And what we saw in terms of the response from ministers of government and ministerial authorities, where they were not so close to what existed then, we saw that there was a better interest, there was more efforts made to understand. I'm not too sure at this stage it is still sufficient, but my point that I'm making here is that state mechanism must understand the structure, the system of emergency management, and they must be okay with it, so that we would ensure that once an emergency response is required, how the mechanism kicks in. And as I said again, I saw the system becoming overwhelmed, and there were doubling and overriding of responsibilities, and there were people tripping over each other because they didn't understand what needed to happen. And again, had they have known, we could have had less repeat, less wastage, because people would have known what existed at some point, what this ministry was doing, what this department was doing, what resources existed in this area, so that we could have, rather than sending 2 trucks in one area, we would have sent 1, because we understood that this other area has a need that we need to do that. So I made this point in terms of state operatives understanding the system, because emergency response is really critical. And so if we have to empower communities at the strategic level, at the policy level, they too must know and their roles and their responsibilities at every level. They don't have to become a technocrat, but they have to know, and knowing will also help you to put the resources where they are really required.
Stick up in there. We suddenly come back and talk more about emergency scene management and emergencies in general. And we do have a caller online. Let's see what this caller has to contribute this morning. Good morning to you, caller.
Hello, good morning. What he said there is exactly truth. But you know what I noticed over the years? You go to hospital, something is very terribly wrong with you. And if they don't see something is bleeding, they put you sit down there and say that is not an emergency. Sometimes you have an internal something and it's an emergency. It's not just bleeding that is emergency. You go there, you might not have the bleeding, but there is an internal condition that is emergency. And people must think about these things. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Thank you. She does have a point.
She does have a point.
And so in our conversation, we were more talking about the common injuries that are more visual.
That's correct. That's correct.
See. But there could also be, of course, injuries that are internal that may not have that visual effect.
Yes.
And sometimes you have to know how to deal with that.
Yes.
But
In addition to that, an expansion of the callers' comment and observation, it has to do a lot, not because the general hospital, any emergency system is not intending to ignore anybody who has an injury.
I agree.
And sometimes it has to do with personalities and individuals. And I can tell you that the system would have a policy that is intended to be driven in a particular way, but individuals who have their own personalities, who might wake up on a different side of the bed sometimes, they do give those kinds of attitude, and sometimes they do not do the system justice.
So it's not intentional. Right?
It may not always be fair to blame the entire system, because I have seen it in my own professional life, that you hear of people and you wonder, well, how do you speak to members of the public in that way? How do you deal with that? It is not the case. So I would not really beat the entire system. It sometimes boils back, but the caller does have a point that it requires a total assessment of every individual to ensure the appropriate treatment is administered.
Right.
And that is not an understatement.
All right. We do have another caller. Let's see what this caller has to chime in this morning. Good morning to you, caller.
Good morning. Mr. Sylvan, I always admire you. If I was younger, I would have take part of your, try to adopt part of your style of encouraging people and talking and explaining what you know. You are being able to transfer your skill, your knowledge, your attitude in a good way. Now, I have looked at people being placed in certain positions and they cannot do the job. In other words, when you are placed in a particular situation, you have to be able to be a quick thinker, and you must have initiative. You, not even if you learn certain way, you have to adapt yourself and deal with the situation as you see it. But at the same time, you have to have experience, and you have to, at the spur of the moment, start thinking, well, let's see, at the very onset, what should I do? How should I remedy this or that? Many of people are placed, they call them square pegs in wrong hole or wrong peg in square hole. A lot of people want jobs that they cannot do. And this is the problem with us, perhaps in Grenada. A lot of people have been placed there, and they want to man things, and they do not have the ability to man it. Because I always say, even when we listen to certain things that have been said, in fact, there used to be a lady with you in an independence celebration. I didn't say independence celebration, that to me, she could have been a problem to you, because when she should help you, she arguing with you, and she always laugh and laugh and laugh. This is not what people should do. Command the situation. You know who I'm talking about. Anyhow, that's my contribution.
Thank you, sir. Have a good morning. All right, thank you for that caller there. So we drew for a break. Let's take
We'll take a break and then we get back into emergency scenes management.
We talk about that some
Thank
more.
you.
Getting a little bit dive today. We're coming right back after the break, folks.
My Caribbean.
Building or renovating your home or business? Why not use clean, renewable energy? Install solar panels to power your home and office and see your energy costs go down and your savings go up. Using renewable solar-powered energy protects our environment, reduces our carbon footprint, and slows the devastating impact of climate change. Republic Bank can help to finance construction and renovations that make use of renewable energy. Visit any Republic Bank branch and ask about renewable energy financing options today.
Republic Bank, we're the one for you.
with the NLA by simply purchasing your Daily Pick 3 and Playway tickets at your nearest agent or NLA outlet. As a proud sponsor of the CPL cricket coverage, the NLA continues to support the development of sports, culture, and nation building in Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique. The NLA, making your dreams a reality.
I'm a winner, you are winner, we are winners, winners, winners.
Who does man of the party? Tell them it's 4-7 trade. Shout it, let them know where we represent 4-7 trade. Who's the body's passing? 4-7 trade. Them no crazy like.
Are you a small business and would like your business to grow? Do you have an event, products, or
Welcome back to our listeners and viewers this morning. To the point for today, Monday. It's the 26th day of September 2022. Once again, we have Sylvan McIntyre with us this morning. And we're talking this morning, we started off talking about common injuries, and we have chimed into now emergency and emergency scene management, etc. We're going to continue on that trend that we have started before we start taking the calls, and we got slightly diverted to what we were already getting into. Let's get into emergency scene and management. Let's give us a more synopsis of pertaining to emergency scenes and the management. How do folks go about, especially when it comes to the scene of an emergency, and how an individual should manage it, or what the individual should know pertaining to when in managing an emergency?
I guess you recognize and appreciate that all of the topics that we're touching here, they are expansive, and they can form an entire program. We can go on for days.
We could go until 12 o'clock today talking about these things.
And so this is why we're going to see all of them. We're going to kind of summarize them to the extent that we would give people just sufficient.
And maybe one of these days we probably could come back and
expand on some of them.
In more details pertaining to it.
Yeah. So we try to give a prelude into emergency scenes management, where we said that once you're going to respond to something, that it starts from the top all the way down to communities. But every community member has a responsibility to each other, a moral responsibility. And as I mentioned, our communities, we are knitted to each other. And if there is an emergency, we want to respond. We want to go out there and deal with scenes. We've seen fire, we've seen motor vehicle accidents and so occurring. And we see sometimes other injuries that may occur in the home where people would want to assist. One thing I want to advise people in communities that a person trapped under a piece of wood in a vehicle, a person in a pool of blood or otherwise, may not necessarily be an accident. It can also be the scene of a crime. And we have to be mindful of that. So that's the first responsibility to us. While every one of us, including the police who are responding, the primary role is towards life, saving of life. But we have to also ensure as community members that, one, the safety factor is of paramount importance to yourself and to the individual. So once you see something or hear of something, before entering any scene, the first thing you want to do is to examine the safety factor. Is it safe enough for me to enter? Is there any toxic substance or fume that might be coming from that vehicle or from that house that can affect me now or later? We have seen maybe children who might be born later with deformities or otherwise, and people they're not quite aware of the origin. And sometimes it could be as a result of you entered an area where there was some toxic substance in an accident, and you inhale that, and then it had this long-lasting effect that has affected maybe even a fetus. So the safety factor is critical, whether you are putting yourself, the other persons around in danger, or whether there is continuing or looming danger for the persons who might be in that level of emergency. So that is critically important. And I alluded to the fact that every person that seems to be in need in a pool of blood or otherwise, it may not be just an accident, it could be the scene of a crime. And if it's the scene of a crime, it means therefore that the first person or persons who enter, you're likely to be interviewed by the police. Therefore, you should not touch things unnecessarily except something that is life-threatening to yourself or maybe to the victims thereon. And if you are going to do that, you need to take note of what you're moving, how you're moving it.
We do hear the statement coming from them contaminating the scene of the wherever whatever happened. May not actually, as you say, it may be just an accident that you have noticed.
Yes.
But something could have preluded to the accident.
Absolutely.
You understand?
And the police will need somewhere what you call a lead to start the investigation. It may be a crime that need to be solved, and that initial entry into that area could distort, they can damage useful evidence. For instance, people may get around there and they may trample, they may damage things, there might be footprints or otherwise that the police may need to get. There might be fingerprints that they may need to follow up in that emergency. And so that is critical. So once you observe an emergency, ensure that you enter in a particular direction and you would keep that place that you move as consistent as possible.
Let me ask you this and see, and I'm not sure if maybe we're on the same scene with this.
Yeah.
But you hear from time to time an incident may occur, accident and so on, and the individuals around may say, boy, don't go and interfere with that because you may cause more problems for that individual who may have gotten injured. You understand? What's your take on that in terms of, now we're talking about the scene management per se. You may not be qualified.
Yes.
But you say, no, if I didn't help Tom take that tree off of him, he probably would have died. You understand?
Yes.
But sometimes you may now, by the process in terms of how you may take that tree off or even help that individual get out of the car, you may cause more injury to that individual.
That is true.
You understand? Because you may not know, well, I should have turned him this way to help alleviate the pain or stop the bleeding or whatever situation to go. What's your take on that?
You have just re-identified and consolidated the need for community response training. And I would like to expand on that to also say that it is better to do little than to do nothing at all. And it is best to do something when you know what you're doing. So it identified the need for people to understand and to be trained more at community level. But how would we live with our conscience if we saw something and did nothing about it and then the person perished? And then in some instance, how do we do something and then we aggravate to make worse a situation that could have been easy? Well, there are situations where, let me just put it this way, I as one person who can teach people how to respond to emergencies, I cannot teach common sense. And there are something that may boil down into making a common sense decision in terms of, if this is a life and death situation, I need to do something about it, understand it. And if it's a situation where I'm putting myself at additional risk of the person, I need to stand back. And I also would like to use this little cliche with the O.J. Simpson, if in doubt, leave it out. Yeah, so you might be in doubt as to exactly what you should do. It might be better to leave it out than you make a bad situation worse. And so training people at community level could never be too much or too many. All right, so that is important. So it is really critical that people understand that you need to make an intervention, do something about a situation. One thing community persons are not authorized to do is to try to use medications and treatment items and so on to people, give people things through their mouth and all these things you want to treat them. Your basic responsibility is to ensure, one, if somebody is in a situation where they're bleeding, to minimize the bleeding. If a person is unconscious, to help them to regain some consciousness by putting them lie down, elevating their legs, etc. If a person has an injury, for instance, you may suspect a fracture or a break, as the case may be, or a dislocation, what you want to do is to immobilize it by putting something to support it, and you treat them in the position as you meet them without getting any kind of a rocket science, anything. And if you're going to transport somebody, especially, here is a general one. As a community member, if you're not trained or otherwise, or even if you're limited, you have limited training, anyone who has had a fall from whatever height, you want to first look at the worst case scenario, suspect spinal injury. So if you suspect spinal injury, limited movement of that person should be applied. And in this case, you want to ensure that the head where the spinal cord starts, right at the base of the head, that you want to keep that in line with the body as much as possible. So if there's more than one person, you ask that somebody keep that head stable and a limited movement. Now, if you are going to move that person in a transport or any vehicle or the other, that person must be first placed, and there's a way that you want to place them on a solid, flat structure. So someone who has fallen, you do not want to risk putting them on a flexible stretcher or using makeshift blankets or sheet, for that matter, to move them. You want to ensure that once a person has fallen, you can't go wrong with this. It is better to be safe. They may get to the hospital, they may do an examination, and they may find that there is no concussion, there is no underlying issue, and so on. You're safe. But once you suspect somebody has fallen, ensure that you look around for a solid, flat something, piece of ply, piece of board, and at least you want to stable from the base of the neck or the entire head all the way down at least to the waist or the buttocks thereabout, because that's where the spine starts and ends. So at least that portion you want to ensure it stays together and the body stays as a unit as much as possible. This way, that process, I can't teach that one too much, because we've seen people, they became vegetables because people moved them and they did not move them right. People lost their lives because their spine snapped in the process and they also died. So we're saying that process is one everybody should learn. That if somebody has fallen, they met in a serious accident, you want to suspect that there could be spinal injury and treat them in that way. Ensure that the head is always stable and the body is kept in one straight unit with limited movement or flexibility at all. That is one thing you want to look out for. And in addition to that, you want to look for signs of contusions. What you call, people have conkeys, or they have what they call internal bleeding, or these bumps that you may see on people. Those contusions wound, which we call bruise, where there's the blood on the inside of the skin or inside of the body that you can see. The area is discolored, it is dark, it is tender, and so forth. What you want to suspect is that this person may have a blood vessel that is broken. A contused wound or a bruise is a silent killer. People who meet in accidents and so forth that may have contused wounds, they need to be assessed immediately. So anyone seen that happen in an accident, or take them or advise them to get an assessment at the hospital. Do not try to treat yourself. One early application for fractures, strains, sprains, or even contused wound is to ensure you put a cold compress. So you limit the amount of fluid to that area, you limit the blood flow that can lead to inflammation or can lead to increased pressure in that area, and increased pressure in a particular area of wound also increases pain. So that is an intro as to how you handle that kind of emergency. Now, first responders, people who are trained, will come on the scene. Community members are supposed to be support. And very often you see community members want to take away the work from the professionals. The nurses arrive on the scene with the ambulance and they wouldn't give them a chance. The fire people arrive on the scene to control the fire and they want to grab the hose from them, etc. Your responsibility as a community member is in support of. As a first responder, as somebody who knows a bit of first aid, once a doctor or nurse arrive, we work in tandem, we work together. I must work. They become the superior person then.
You say as a professional arrives, you let them take over.
You let them take over.
If they're the manual assistants or the actual
That's correct.
You offer it in
That's correct.
What they tell you to help.
But you must also put yourself in a position to give them a history or to give them information as to what you met, what you saw. When the police also arrive, again, for two reasons. Police are also firemen, and the CID they are also investigators. So what you want to be able to do is to give them as much information. One, the health professionals would get a better understanding of how to treat with the injury. Once they get an understanding as to the mechanism of what may have caused it, or the time it may have happened, and what may have led to it, they are able to treat that much quicker. The police, on the other hand, will be able to look for life-threatening situations and also for crime issues that they can later investigate. And so I want to crown it out by saying emergency scenes management is a collaborative effort between the community, the professionals or the practitioners in the field who are trained to do that. And they must all work, or we must all work in support of the greater good. Remembering at all time, our aim and our desire is to preserve a life, to save a life, prevent injuries from becoming worse. One way of doing that when you have bleeding situation is to control the bleeding. When you have respiratory problems where people cannot breathe properly, your aim is to ensure that there's an open airway, that there's limited or no obstruction to airways. We see people that may be epileptic or otherwise, and they they will have difficulty in breathing. And people would grab and hold on to them and do not create a space for them to release the amount of energy that they have. An epileptic person would fall to the ground eventually. So we need to be mindful of that they will die of secondary injuries rather than of the epilepsy itself.
You see them bumping their heads and stuff. And
that's correct.
And I have also noticed once I listened to someone who's in first aid, I always say, always try to put something that would help them support the head. Something of a soft nature, because
that would pad them.
That would help the pad, just padding per se, you mentioned, to sort of offer that bit of a support. Because sometimes there's not much you can do until that person recovers from the situation they're in. Right?
And one angle finally in the emergency scenes management area, where you may have victims where you do a prioritizing and a sorting out of more serious and less serious injuries and so forth. Anything that is of a bleeding nature is a life and death. Anything where breathing is restricted, so it's called the ABCs: airways, breathing, circulation. These are the life-saving steps. Anywhere any of these is threatened, a person is in a life-threatening situation. And if you're going to leave them there to get a transport from the community, if you're going to leave them there for the ambulance to arrive, so for instance, somebody may be pulled out of the water, they have a near drowning situation, and you did some resuscitation, you gave them chest compression, and you may give them some rescue breath, and they may vomit, or they may regurgitate, or they may be recovering slowly. If you have to leave them lying for a while, any injury where somebody has fallen to the ground, the best position is in the recovery, lying on their side, not face down, not on their back where their heads are up in the air, because that could lead to restricting of the organs. And if you leave them on their bellies, they can bleed. Other forms of liquid can come from the system.
Is there a particular side that you put them on?
Left or right, it doesn't really matter, because the left side might be injured and the right side might be okay. Once you put them on the side, the hands under the head tilted slightly backward, and the knees pulled up slightly so that it supports the body from falling flat on the face. That is the recovery position. So one of the foot stretched out and the other one pulled slightly. The person lying on the side, hands underneath the head, tilted slightly backward. You can guarantee a better recovery than the person wallowing in the thing that they vomited or regurgitated, or they lying and get suffocating because they couldn't breathe properly. That is always the best step in an emergency scenes management.
So we just approximately just about 3 more minutes left on the show this morning. Time suddenly
definitely took off.
Flight just
so much more to talk about.
But we could entertain a couple phone calls before we officially wrap up this morning. Interesting conversation this morning from the common injury, of course, injuries, the emergency scene management. Of course, we did have so much more to talk about.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But I said, we were just grazing the field of that for now. We haven't.
Some of them we are going to revisit because there's more we can really give on them and so forth. Because each topic has more that people can do.
Exactly. We're going to grab a couple of phone calls this morning, folks. We're limited for time, so we'll actually have your comments a bit short. And if Sylvan can chime in on your comments, we certainly will. Let's take this first call. Caller, good morning.
Hi, morning. Just to say that two brief points. Grenada Ministry of Health had mass casualty emergency training just at the end of August into September. Also, ECAT training and IC training, which is Incident Command, Emergency Care and Treatment, and as I said, mass casualty training. And it's surprising to know that a number of people are not aware of that, because we don't make important things our business. Now, the persons who were trained is over around 60 or 70 of them, and they are certified for a period of 3 years on successful completion. Mr. Peter Burgess is the one who spearheaded or facilitated that training. So there are people out there who are trained and spread it throughout Grenada, Carriacou, and pretty much. So that in itself goes for capacity building. And I'm saying that because I heard some of the callers and read some of the comments. In addition to that, people, Mr. McIntyre is on the ball with that. Now, you have to understand that when you go to the hospital system, it's a triaging system. When you go to A&E, the nurses will triage you. And from experience, a nurse or a doctor do not need to put a stethoscope on you or something on you to triage you and tell you that you do not have a life-threatening medical emergency. How we operate is that priority is given to life-threatening medical emergencies. So people have to understand, and that's why you have health centers and medical stations that are placed within a 1 mile radius so that persons can access them. What you find happening also is that people are not going to the health centers for minor things, and they run to the hospital, which clogs up the system. Unfortunately, persons are not taking these things very seriously. And so I am happy that Mr. McIntyre made that call, a person to understand how the system works. And if people do appreciate that and take time off to know these things, and even if people can also limit the prank calls and so on, that will most definitely help in terms of our response. Thank you.
Thank you, caller, for your contribution. Caller did make some important points there, Sylvan. So did make some important. We probably could accommodate one more call because we a bit strapped for time. We accommodate one more call and we take a wrap for this morning. Good morning to you, caller.
Yes, Mr. Sylvan. This is specifically to Mr. Sylvan because I know he's a believer in Christ. I believe the most important thing, if you see somebody in an accident or whatever situation, and it's life-threatening, the best thing is to get that person to receive Christ if they have not, so that if they die, they have eternal life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, caller. Sylvan, that's what we're going to take a wrap for today's program.
Yeah, we can.
Pleasure as always having you coming and talk about the issues that we speak about, and it is important for the everyday way of life.
Yeah,
and how we move through, especially when it comes down to emergency situations per se.
Yeah.
Whether it's of a hurricane, a storm,
that's right.
A fire or an accident, once something that comes about an emergency, how you respond is important.
Yes.
Thanks once again.
There are quite a bit more that we'll probably expand on in our next program.
Yes, we'll certainly try to do more next program.
Yes.
We'll try to do more. Hey, folks, that's how we say goodbye for today. It's a pleasure being here with you as always. Folks, you can join us for another edition of To The Point tomorrow. You could join me once again on To The Point. Sylvan will be with us next week. All the best, folks. Have a great day today.